Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about album number 8 from Fortet, Morning Evening. Alright then, we've made it to the last Fortet studio album, which I haven't already made a video on. A fun fact, in the Vegas project that I use for these regular reviews, I need to keep an album cover there as like a placeholder so that it stays in the same position every time. And for the past 5 years, I think ever since I did my original Best Albums of 2015 video, Morning Evening has been that placeholder album cover. This will be the first and last time since 2015 where I open up this project file and don't replace the picture next to me. It is a pretty cool album cover, you gotta admit. I like seeing it there. Anyway, this is a pretty interesting point in the Fortet catalog, structured totally differently from any of Fortet's other albums. Just 2 tracks here that both run on for about 20 minutes. And these 2 pieces are not exactly like giant prog rock masterworks with multiple parts or phases or delivering anything particularly complex. This is a later period Fortet album. The complexity is not really a part of his musical equation anymore. Instead, these 2 tracks mainly stick to repeating the same loops over and over for the majority of their running time. It is one of the more controversial entrants in his catalog, I guess. I've seen plenty of people praise this album for its attempt at these pieces with more ambitious lengths, but end up befuddled or outright let down by the lack of musical development within them. Now, obviously, back when I made my first ever year-end list in 2015, Morning Evening got listed as an honorable mention, and then taken off the list when I redid that list 5 years later for a sub-special. Though, not gonna lie, I'm starting to reconsider whether it was really worth taking off. Even though I fully understand anyone who wasn't a fan of this project, and it's not one that gives me a lot to, analyze or break down, it's one that's maintained a special place in my heart. The length of the pieces, or their repetitive nature, has never bothered me. I've obviously heard much less dimensional or investing pieces of the same length, if not even longer. Don't tell these people about, Klaus Schultz. God forbid they try to get through, a 2-hour ambient drone album like Cyborg or something. Though I do think this project is meant to be digested in the same way that some extended ambient project like that would be. Less the kind of thing meant to capture your full attention, and more just trying to create its own sense of meditative space for the listener to immerse themselves in. And not only do I think Fortet nailed it, he did it in such a way that still easily fits in his usual style and feels very personal to him specifically. See, Kieran Hebden is half Indian on his mother's side. He grew up with some of that culture in his life, obviously, and he'd had a bunch of records of Bollywood movie soundtracks and Hindu devotional music passed down to him when his grandfather passed away when he was younger. He just put them on a shelf and forgot about them until his grandmother also passed away while he was making Beautiful Rewind. It started to make him feel like he was losing his touch with his roots, so he pulled out those old Indian records and found himself totally enraptured by them. He latched onto this one recording of the singer Lata Mangeshkar, sorry for butchered pronunciations. Basically just had a loop of her voice playing for 3 straight days, and then he was like, I gotta base an album around this. And the result, obviously, is Morningside. It's basically just that one loop, with some light buzzing synth pads and a typical house beat that fits with all his other usual stuff. And honestly, you really don't need anything else beyond that one loop. The final effect is one of the most emotionally resonant pieces in the entire Fortet catalog, and I don't make that statement lightly. It's probably got a solid lock on for my top 5 favorite tracks from him ever. I mean, sure, 20 minutes of nothing but that one loop can be a bit much, but I never get sick of it. And it is a bit of an exaggeration to say that said loop is all that Morningside has to offer. He does manipulate the sample, reverse it, echo it. He's not just letting it sit there by itself the whole time. There's also a little breakdown around the halfway mark for this nice little house drum solo that was fun. He brings in all these light melodic synths to join in with the sample, and even focuses entirely on those synths for the last 5 minutes or so and just lets them plink away. And that's just absolutely freaking beautiful moment too. How people found this boring is beyond me. This thing can legit get me to tear up. And then there's Evening Side, which may not hit as much of a raw emotional note for me as Morning Side, But on some listens, it's turned up even more refreshing, and certainly has much more musical progression than Morningside. It starts out with like this little segment of plinky little percussion textures and maybe a few little synth bleeps, eventually shifting into this nice long segment of slowly building synth pads, more manipulations of a sample of an Indian singer. I don't know if it's the same one she's joining in. And the mix slowly gets denser and more colorful as you go on, creating this really nice, mysterious, and fittingly nocturnal vibe to everything. But then there's one more switch up after this build-up, around the 12-minute mark. The build-up just finishes, switching over to much sparser mixes of his usual plinking synths. And after the 13-minute mark, the whole track slowly switches over from entirely beatless to entirely percussion-focused in the last 5 minutes. A whole segment that is nothing but banging house beats echoing about, creating as good a groove as you'd hope for out of any later period Fortet track. Even has like a few little moments where the beat just like covers itself in reverb and just like and then just picks up right where it left off, and it's just really cool. And the whole thing ends in a fade out, a move I would ordinarily criticize, but I did actually like read an interview saying that like even that fade out has a personal meaning to Hebden. Like, he basically said it symbolizes going out to infinity and the album ending in, like, the club because that symbolizes the world that Hebden lives in now. Which, you know, I never think that such a commonplace move would have that much meaning behind it. Though, I guess on the other hand, my favorite album of all time also ends in a fade-out symbolizing going out into infinity, so there is that too. Gonna be honest, the more I read about this album and what it meant to Hebden personally, and the more I sit with it and listen to it, the more I think I've just convinced myself that this album, it's legit great. I may have been influenced by other reviewers being underwhelmed by the lack of development and thought it was a take I should consider as well. But the more actively I think about it, the less I actually buy the arguments against this one. It may be true that, like, there are other Fortet albums that I like more than it, because they have more progression. For instance, I don't think it's better than 16 Oceans. That project obviously had a lot more substance and meat on its bones, kept itself interesting with a lot more ideas to uncover and explore with repeat listens, while being similarly great at setting mood, might even be better suited to morning listening than even this project was. But I don't think this project being comparatively lacking in substance actually works to its detriment, because it's so obviously not trying to be that kind of album. I especially don't feel like I could complain in that department, as someone who has marked Oval's 94 Discount as one of my favorites of all time. Like, that album starts with this 20-minute track called Do While. It's basically just the same unchanged loop the entire time. And that's like a 2-second loop on repeat compared to Morningside's like 30-second loop. And that one also fakes you out into thinking it's gonna go somewhere else for a moment halfway through. That's got like a proper fake ending in it. This album may only be 2 tracks and obviously keep its pacing and progression very slow. But damn if it doesn't still pull me in all the way through every time I actually put it on. If the loops it focuses on aren't to your liking, sure, I guess that's your problem. And I'll admit that not every listen I've given it myself has hit as hard as the next. It's not really an anytime album, and especially in years previous, I do remember the length and repetition getting to me on some occasions. But I mean, even so, I don't remember it really bothering me much even back then. And I gotta say, coming back to it now, I feel like there's no excuse for me to not solidly place it in great territory, or not mark it as one of my personal favorite Fortet albums. So I'm gonna give it an 8.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.